In this video, you will be shown the steps involved in creating a new dimension style based on the settings recommended in the ASME Y145-2009 dimension standard. These settings would be appropriate for dimensioning a machine part where the dimension increments are in decimal inches. The first step is to open the Dimension Style Manager. This is done by selecting the Dimension Style icon located on the Dimension toolbar, or from the Annotation panel of the ribbon, pick on the down arrow and pick the icon here, or you can even type Dim Style, D-I-M-S-T-Y-L-E, and press Enter. All three will open the Dimension Style Manager. The next step is to select the New button. This will open the Create New Dimension Style dialog box, and at this point we want to type in the new style name. And I'm going to call this ASME Small Radii, and the reason for naming it that I hope will be apparent in a few minutes. Next, I'm going to select the Continue button. This will open up the box that has the tabs where I need to change the settings involved in creating this dimension style. So let's start with the Lines tab and just look at what our settings should be. Everything so far looks pretty good. Under our baseline spacing, the ASME standard says the minimum spacing between baseline dimensions is 0.25 inches. So you can either change that to 0.25 or just stay with something that's larger than 0.25. 0.38 is AutoCAD's default setting, and that looks okay to me. I think I'll just leave that one the way it is. Everything looks good over here. The ones we will need to change are Extend Beyond Dimension Lines. That controls how far an extension line extends beyond the last arrow. The recommended setting for that is 0.125. The next setting is Offset from Origin. That defines the gap between the object and the beginning of the extension line. The ASME standard says that this should be a visible gap, and 0.0625 is fine. That gives it a 1/16 of an inch. You can make that a little bit larger if you wanted, but I'm going to continue and just default to the 0.0625 setting. The next tab I want to look at is the Symbols and Arrows tab. On this tab I set the style of arrowhead that I want, and I want these close-filled arrowheads. That's fine. It gives me the dark, sharp arrowheads that look good on a mechanical drawing. Under Arrow Size, this defines the length of the arrowhead. I'm going to type 0.125. On the Center Mark style, I'm going to select Line. And when that's selected, this is the type of dimension line that AutoCAD will default to. The other settings on this tab look fine. I don't need to change anything on them. The next is the Text tab. For the text style, I'm going to stay at standard unless if I had a different style I wanted to use, I could select that here, but I'm going to stay with standard. Text color, I'm going to stay with the by block setting, and but down here under text height, I'm going to set this to 0.125. Now there's a relationship between text height and arrow size. It's recommended that whatever you set your text height to, that you match that with the length of your arrows, and that's why over here on the Symbols and Arrows tab I set the arrow size to 0.125. So I'm going to go back to text. The settings I want here are centered, and I want the text to read from left to right. This is all in the text placement pane, and I want horizontal selected over here on my text alignment. The next tab is the Fit tab. And on this one, this is the one that's going to affect the way that arrowheads are drawn on small radii and small diameters on my drawing. And so what I want to do is set this to both text and arrows. And I want to select this one box under Fine Tuning, the top box that says Place Text Manually. Everything else is fine under this one. And the last tab is the Primary Units tab. And my linear dimensions, I want them to be in decimal inches. The precision I'm going to set to 2 places. The way I determine the precision for my dimensions is I looked at the designer sketch and I realized that most of the dimensions on the designer sketch are at 2 decimal places of precision. So this way the dimensions will default to 2 decimal places, and the dimensions that need to be at greater or less precision, I can edit that individually. The other settings that I need to look at on this one, everything looks good until I get right down here to zero suppression, and I'm going to check the box for leading zero suppression. And if I do not check this box, what AutoCAD will do is try to put a 0 before the decimal point on any dimension that's less than 1 inch in value. So I want that one checked. If I were setting this up for a metric drawing, I would probably be checking the trailing 0 box and suppressing those, but I don't want to do that if I'm working in imperial units or in inches. Under my alternate units, I have those. I don't have this checked, so those are not going to show. I don't want alternate units to show on this. And under tolerance, I want my tolerance format to be set to none. And so I can pretty much leave those 2 tabs alone if those are the settings that it's defaulting to. At that point, I'm going to select OK. And so here's my new dimension style. I'm going to select the new dimension style, and I'm going to pick Set Current and close. Now I have the dimension layer current, and so I'm going to put a couple of dimensions on here. And the first one I think I'll put on is a diameter for this circle right here. So I'm going to go over to the dimension toolbar and select the diameter tool and pick on the edge of that circle and move out and pick. And you can see that it tells me that it's 2.00, and it drew a center mark for that, which is what I wanted. And the next one I'm going to use, I'm going to dimension this radius right here. I'm going to select radius, I'm going to select, and I'm going to drag this one out and place it right there. I have another radius over here on this side, and so I'm going to select radius, and I'm going to pick here and move it out like this. Now I want you to notice that this is a fairly small radius, and this is the way I want that dimension to look. I want the leader to just point to that arc. Over here, this is a fairly large radius, and what I would really like is for this leader to begin at the center of the arc and extend out in this direction and have the arrow pointing out. And so this is where I want to show you how you can set up a dimension style where you can accomplish that. What I'll do is go back and pick on my dimension style icon again, and you can see that ASME small radii is still selected here. I'm going to pick new, and what this does, it starts a new dimension style that I need to rename, but it starts it based on the settings that I already have for the ASME small radii. So what I'm going to come in here and do, I'm going to change this to large radii, and I'm going to back off this copy of and select continue. Now the only tab that needs to be changed to accomplish this is the fit tab, and I'm going to change these settings to text, and I'm going to check this box as well as the box above it, and I'm going to pick OK, and I'm going to set that one current and pick close. Now I want to show you the difference. Remember, I placed this radius using small radii, and now that I have the large radii dimension style set, I'm going to go back and pick the radius tool. I'm going to pick on this arc, and I'm going to place this just so you can see the difference between those two. And for a large arc like this one is really preferred, so I'm going to click on this one and hit delete and take that one out. Now I can even use this if I have a large diameter. I can also set it the same way, and I'll show you how to change one you already have that you've already placed on your drawing, a dimension you've already placed. I'm going to pick on annotation, and you can see here's my dimension style for that dimension. I'm going to pick on that again. I'm going to pick on the down arrow, and I'm going to select large radii and hit escape, and you can see that it took on the properties of the large radii. Now in doing that, I've lost my center mark, and another way to place a center mark on a drawing is to pick on the center mark icon and go out and select the largest radii that's affected by that, and you'll see that you can add a center mark back in there. So on this drawing, I have a small radius that's using the settings for the small radii style, and I have a large radius and a large diameter, both of which are using the settings for the large radii dimension style that I created. Now let's put a couple more dimensions on here. I'm going to use the linear dimension to start. I'm going to snap to this endpoint, and I'm actually going to go to this quadrant right here and then move out. I move my mouse so that I'm in between the arrowheads, and I'm going to move about 4/10 of an inch minimum away from my object and select. And it puts this dimension in, and if I want another dimension from where this one ends to here, that's called a continuous dimension. I would pick the continue tool, and all I have to do now is go select the next endpoint and then press enter, and it created a continuous line of dimensions. Now I'm going to hit escape, and I'm going to erase both of those out, and I'm going to use baseline and show you the difference between those styles. I'm going to always start with a linear. I'm going to select here. I'm going to go to this quadrant, and I'm going to place my first linear dimension. And then rather than a continuous, if I want a baseline, what I do is go pick on the baseline tool and then go pick the next endpoint and then hit escape. And you can see that it created a baseline style dimension. Now, I said a minute ago that I've got my precision set to 2 decimal places. If I want to change the precision, I just pick on a dimension, right-click my mouse, go to precision, and let's say I need that to be 3 decimal places. Just select on 3 decimal places, and you can see that it changes that one to 3 decimal places. A minute ago when I placed this dimension, this linear dimension, I want to show you something about that. I'm going to delete this one out. I dimensioned from this corner to this quadrant, and I want to show you why I did that. I'm going to do a linear dimension, and I'm going to snap to this endpoint. And this time, instead of going to the quadrant, I'm going to go to the center point, and then I'm going to move down here, and I'm going to place that dimension. And what happened by doing that is that my dimension line runs all the way into the center point, and there's not a little break right here like there is on the other sides of my center mark. And I really want that break to be there. And so that's why I dimensioned to the quadrant. By dimensioning to the quadrant, it keeps the break in there. Now there's a way I can edit this. I can pick on the dimension, and the grips will light up, and I can pick on this grip and hold down with the mouse and drag that down to the quadrant down here. This is showing me an intersection right here. And then hit escape, and you can see that now I have that gap all the way around. And if I pick on it, there's where my dimension is. It's actually starting right here where at the quadrant of that circle. And those are the steps involved in creating a dimension style with the ASME Y145-2009 dimension standard settings.